Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights, here with Jon Flemister. We're going to talk about shows in the 80s. We'll start out with the Nationals, which were certainly noteworthy. In fact, the birth of the National was 1980, annually to this day, although this year, perhaps in jeopardy. But thanks, John, and thanks, sponsors. Topps Panini Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, Comc.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. So thanks, Jon Flemister. Let's go back to 1980 and talk about shows that were all the rage. Shows in the 70s, I talked about those. They were hitting their stride. And in 80, the hobby was ripe for a national convention, which I went to. And you say you didn't go to that one, but there wasn't a huge crowd for that. It was like a big regional show, but it got off the mark. And so and then 81 was in Detroit with the Torpies, and they were friends of mine. And they were the regional show promoters, did an excellent job. And they basically it was just like a regional show on steroids, probably double the dealers, double the attendance, and a great fun, and it established the National as a concept. Okay, so now pick up Jon Flemister with 82, the third National, which is in St. Louis, which is not far from Little Rock, where you are with your dad. So what's your memory of St. Louis, that very first National? Was it momentous for you?
Yeah, what I remember it was 225 tables, and I believe one of the promoters was Paul Marchant, if I'm not mistaken. There was three gentlemen involved. We had actually done a couple of shows in St. Louis prior to the National, so we had developed a relationship with those guys, and we were able to get in, and it was a well-attended show from what I remember. And as a kid growing up in the hobby, sometimes you would order things through magazines, and one of the big dealers back then was Larry Frisch. And we just happened to be set up directly across from Larry Frisch. So it was kind of eye-opening for a 14-year-old to be sitting 20 feet across from one of the largest dealers in the country. But it was a well-attended show, and I believe Enos Slaughter and some other Cardinals were there, former Cardinals that were there signing. But 3-day show, but we did very well at that show.
Yeah, Larry Frisch, one of the very few Nationals he attended, but he could block out the sun. He was a tall dude, but totally knew his cards. And the other guy that was there that the last National he attended was Buck Barker, who was another hobby legend that was quite old. But that's the kind of stuff you got at the National back in those days. You'd have people that didn't set up for any other shows who were a fountain of knowledge. And just these amazing guys. By the way, shout out to the other guys. I think the other promoters, one was B.A. Murray, my good friend, and the other, I think, was Mimi Alanchi. I think those were the three.
That sounds right.
Three regular guys. They weren't like professional promoters.
No.
They jumped in, and again, those were simpler days. Okay, let's skip ahead to the next one. The next one was the next one Chicago? Yeah, Chicago. And it wasn't, again, still on the smaller level. I don't know if it was Bruce and Benita Painter or the Chicago Sports Collectors Association that kind of took the lead there. But it was again, still a national. But like the other shows that you went to, that I went to, they were still kind of hotel centric. It'd be like hotel. And I think that was also the case. Do you remember anything about the Chicago show?
Well, it was similar to St. Louis in that it was basically just a large show with a lot, I think, probably 250 tables. But unlike the National today, where you've got all these large exhibits and all the card companies are there with their displays and everything, it wasn't anything like that. It was strictly, like you said, a large hotel show, but it was publicized as the National. And they usually had it in the summer or into the summer. And so it was just kind of a big meeting place for card gurus, and all the dealers try to get in. And we were fortunate back then. Once you were in, you had the chance to either opt in or opt out each year. And so as the shows grew, we were fortunate to have stayed on the list.
Well, I think, like I said, the lack of corporates was turned into an advantage in the sense that it mainly just featured the dealers, and the dealers, like I said, that only set up at that show. That was just. It was just wonderful to interact with them, see their stuff. You'd see stuff you'd never see, and now the corporates kind of are center stage. Yes. Okay, Parsippany the next year. Did you guys go to the East Coast?
My dad did, but I didn't. He went with a couple of the local customers of ours that ended up going, but I did not go to Parsippany.
Okay, well I don't know if it's my claim to fame or Rich's claim to fame, but that's where Rich says we met. I think we met. But to bring the national to the East Coast was a really big deal and was not
right
too lightly, because there was a lot of strength in the hobby in the East Coast, but things are more expensive, the Midwest. Anyway, so the Parsippany show is also where I kind of launched Beckett Baseball Card Monthly. I mean, it was at least when I was there. So that was, again, still a pretty big show, but a big show for the East Coast, had been very successful. The next year, the craziness of the first of several that wound up being in LA in like the Disneyland situation.
Oh, yeah.
La La Land. That's a lot of fun. I'm very close friends with those guys that promoted that, and this is the one they really want. I think they really wanted to take it to the next level because they were kind of getting a shot. And did you guys have fond memories of that one too?
We did. We stayed at the Disneyland Hotel and just kind of made a vacation out of it. But I just remember that, boy, it's really, not only was the hobby growing, but the expanse of the National was really going to the next level. There were several hundred more tables at that show than at St. Louis and Chicago, and you just felt like you were on a bigger stage. There seems to be more of a presence of the card companies were there, but you just felt like you were on a much bigger stage once you got to Los Angeles.
Well, the master of ceremonies, the master of the stage, Mike Burkus, I think a lot of his personal relationships were brought into that. And the biggest thing I can think of that happened at that show is something that didn't happen. And that is that at that show at the Disneyland Hotel, there was a vote for where the national convention would be the next year. And I, thankfully, came in second with my buddies, Gervis, and we were suggesting that we could promote the national, which would have been a bad idea because I had my hands full. But Gervis was such a great guy and such a hard worker and high integrity. And so we really could have done it, but I'm so glad in hindsight we didn't get it. Wanda Marcus won it, and bless him.
Yeah, John and Wanda Marcus.
He did a great job. So the next year, you guys are coming, not to the Gervis Ford and Jim Beckett National, but to the Wanda and John Marcus National, which they did a great job over there in Arlington. And you're having to just pop over from Little Rock. So how was that for you? Was that better because it was closer?
Oh yeah, expense-wise, a lot less costly than going to Los Angeles and spending a week out there. But yeah, that was a great experience. Tons of attendees. Once again, seemed like a bigger stage. But John and Wanda did a fantastic job on that show. I remember going to their presentation in Los Angeles the year before, and you could tell they really, really wanted it. And but yeah, I thought that was a fantastic show.
Well, it pointed out, and I figured this out, with Wanda, is that being a kind of a full-time promoter is important. To be a part-time promoter, and the hobby was getting big. Well, the next year was out in San Francisco at the Moscone, and I was there. I guess you were there too, and I think that was Bob Lee. And I had been going out to the San Francisco shows. It was a hobby area that was emerging, and Bob was becoming a force for really promoting some pretty big shows in the San Francisco area at the Cow Palace and Moscone Center. But any recollections, John, from San Francisco?
Well, I remember going to he had, like you said, he had a big show every year at the Moscone Center, and we always attended that and did very, very well. And I know seems like he had a couple of shows out there that exceeded 1,000 tables. And so he was well positioned, I thought, to put on the national. And like I said, that was an area where the hobby was really gaining a lot of traction. But once again, just tons of people. You were seeing more of a presence from the card companies. A little bit of the corporate angle was moving in, but still just a fantastic show. And we did very well at that one as well. But that's expensive to go out there. You've got to do some dollars to validate going out there for 4 or 5 days. But we had a very good show from what I remember out there.
Not sure it's any more expensive than the next year where we went to Atlantic City. And it's noteworthy about that. I don't think it was a show that was not considered the best run show in some respects, but it needed to get back to the East Coast, and it marked the debut or the preview debut of Upper Deck, which changed the industry. Yeah. Changed the industry. Yeah. They were the talk of the show. Just again, still those were the days when it was mostly vintage, but like you said, there's starting to be some corporates, and Upper Deck kind of, in a sense, kind of bought their way into a license. And again, that changed history. It really helped elevate printing technology and other more sophisticated distribution with the company of Upper Deck.
Yeah, I just remember the big rumor out there is that they were going to be the first company that were going to have packs that were going to retail for $1. And people just could not get past the fact that, you could sell packs for $1 in your hobby store. That just wasn't going to work. But they certainly put forth a good product. But yeah, that show, I think we did okay. But I don't know, there just seemed to be some logistical issues, some organizational issues that it just wasn't up to par from what we had been accustomed to, San Francisco and Dallas and Chicago.
Well, and it's again, not try to be positive tone, but it's one of the reasons the National has, since that time, has not been back to the East Coast as much as you might suggest based on the population. But that was the way it was in the 80s. I mean, in the 80s, a lot of the big shows that we went to, a lot of these Midwestern regional shows were coming into their own. You know, the 70s, I hit New York City a lot and that kind of tri-state area. But by the 80s, it was way more national aspect of these regional shows, and they were well attended, and a lot of you didn't have eBay, you didn't have online purchasing, so you had to go to shows to see the variety of stuff that was out there.
Well, and by the late 80s, it was a year-round proposition. If you were putting on the National, it started the day you got back from your presentation, and it was a 12-month venture because it was a lot to put on, and it was a full-time job for somebody or a group to put it on. It was not something you could just put together in 3 months. I know we had some discussions with John and Wanda Marcus, and the time that they put into that to put on a show of that magnitude. It was a full-time job year-round to put that on.
I'm saying I already had two jobs. I didn't need a third, so I dodged that bullet. And then in '89, to finish the decade of the '80s, the show went back to Chicago. And again, I think the trend here, as we're discussing, and I really hadn't thought about this before we're talking about, is that when one of these major hobby cities hit a national for the second time, they really had their act together. They really took it to the next level. And so that was at the Hyatt Regency, kind of downtown, I think.
Yeah, and I believe the convention center was at McCormick Center, which was a huge space. And
we had a big corporate presence. By then, Beckett Publications had a corporate feel, which I don't like, but it was kind of necessary in that sense. But again, it's just from the beginning of the 80s, where it was kind of like a large regional show, to the end of the 80s, when there was a little bit of a trade show aspect along with the consumer aspect. As Rich has mentioned, there were softball games, there were seminars. We've lost a lot of that now. Do you miss that? Are you seeing that that's something that's just the way it was, or do you miss the good old days? Do you think the 80s were kind of a high point?
You know, Jim, what I remember, especially the early 80s, we kind of, we would do Dallas, Houston, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, St. Louis, Memphis, and we always put a show on in Little Rock. And a lot of the same dealers were setting up at the same show. So it became almost like a community. And I just remember on Fridays and Saturday nights in the hospitality area or the restaurant area or a gathering area, a lot of the dealers would get together and you would, exchange ideas and tell stories. And it just became a really good resource. Most of us started about the same time. Most of us had a store. We were doing some shows, and it was just a really good exchange. And you just felt like you were part of a group of people who had the hobby's integrity, peak interest, and that, you were part of something. As the hobby was exploding, you were around people that were trying to build it the right way. And so we got to be really good friends with a lot of these guys throughout the years because you saw them all the time, and we had a common interest. And that's what I miss more than anything is just the communal feel that you had with these guys, just seeing them at shows. And, we were all kind of doing the same thing, but we were also, trying to help one another and at the same time help grow the hobby as well. And that kind of went away as the shows got bigger, more corporate, more expensive. But those early 80s shows, there was a lot of ideas and relationships that were built and formed that ended up being kind of lost by the late 80s, I thought.
Well, that's a good note. We're out of time, but I couldn't have said it better myself.
The man